We begin this part of the debate with Professor Norman Finkelstein talking about the peace talks at Camp David in July 2000.
My concern is, let's look at the diplomatic record, the factual record. What were the offers being made on each side at the Camp David and in the Taba talks? And the standard interpretation, which is, you can call it the Dennis Ross interpretation, which I think, unfortunately, Dr. Ben-Ami echoes, is that Israel made huge concessions at Camp David and Taba. Palestinians refused to make any concessions because of what Dr. Ben-Ami repeatedly calls Arafat's unyielding positions, and that Arafat missed a huge opportunity. Now, it is correct to say that if you frame everything in terms of what Israel wanted, it made huge concessions. However, if you frame things in terms of what Israel was legally entitled to under international law, then Israel made precisely and exactly 0 concessions. All the concessions were made by the Palestinians. Briefly, because we don't have time, there were 4 key issues at Camp David and at Taba. Number 1, settlements. Number 2, borders. Number 3, Jerusalem. Number 4, refugees. Let's start with settlements. Under international law, there is no dispute, no controversy. Under Article 49 of the 4th Geneva Convention, it's illegal for any occupying country to transfer its population to occupied territories. All of the settlements are illegal under international law. No dispute. The World Court in July 2004 ruled that all the settlements are illegal. The Palestinians were willing to concede 50% of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. That was a monumental concession, going well beyond anything that was demanded of them under international law. Borders. The principle is clear. I don't want to get into it now because I was very glad to see that Dr. Ben-Ami quoted it 3 times in his book. It's inadmissible to acquire territory by war. Under international law, Israel had to withdraw from all of the West Bank and all of Gaza. As the World Court put it in July 2004, those are, quote, occupied Palestinian territories. Now, however you want to argue over percentages, there is no question, and I know Dr. Ben-Ami won't dispute it, the Palestinians were willing to make concessions on the borders. What percentage? There's differences, but there's no question they were willing to make concessions. Jerusalem. Jerusalem's an interesting case, because if you read Dr. Ben-Ami or the standard mainstream accounts in the United States, everyone talks about the huge concessions that Barak was willing to make on Jerusalem. But under international law, Israel has not 1 atom of sovereignty over any of Jerusalem. Read the World Court decision. The World Court decision said Jerusalem is occupied Palestinian territory. Now, the Palestinians were willing, the exact lines I'm not going to get into now. They are complicated. But I'm sure Dr. Ben-Ami will not dispute they were willing to divide Jerusalem roughly in half, the Jewish side to Israel, the Arab side to the Palestinians. And number 4, refugees. On the question of refugees, it's not a dispute under international law. Remarkably, even fairly conservative human rights organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, in 2000 during the Camp David talks, they issued statements on the question of the right of return. And they stated categorically, under international law, every Palestinian, roughly 5 to 6 million, has the right to return, not to some little parcels, 1% of Israel, which Israel is about, Israel would swap, return to their homes or the environs of their homes in Israel. That's the law. Now, Dr. Ben-Ami will surely agree that the Palestinians were not demanding and never demanded the full return of 6 million refugees. He gives a figure of 400,000 to 800,000. In fact, I'm not going to get into the numbers because it's very hard to pin it down. Other authors have given figures of the tens of thousands to 200,000 refugees returning. That's well short of 6 million. On every single issue, all the concessions came from the Palestinians. The problem is everyone, including Dr. Ben-Ami in his book, he begins with what Israel wants and how much of it wants it's willing to give up. But that's not the relevant framework. The only relevant framework is, under international law, what you're entitled to. And when you use that framework, it's a very, very different picture.